All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Cloud Lunch and Learn session. Today, we have a great presentation on Zero to Hero with securing your infrastructure as code with Bicep, being brought to you by Elhan Yusubov, my good friend and fellow Microsoft MVP. Want to thank everybody for attending. Feel free, if you have any questions, to post a comment in the YouTube comments section, and Elhan will get to that as he's going through his presentation or after he has completed. So, without further ado, Elhan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for introduction, Dwayne. Dwayne is a great presenter as well, and having his introduction makes this day even better, so to speak. Thank you again. Greeting to everyone who is actually attending my session today on Cloud Launch and Learn. And as you know, I'm actually involved in Azure Bicep, and overall, you may find some training courses on LinkedIn that I created, and I'm trying to spread the message about how you can make your life easier by converting and managing your infrastructure code as a managing your infrastructure resources in cloud as a code, right? So that you can have more compliance and more control over it. But in this session, so basically it's going to be somewhat similar to the one that I have delivered a couple weeks ago on a global DevSecOps 2023 presentation, but I added some tweaks here to make sure that it's more oriented toward the Bicep language. And just to give you a heads up, in I would say in a month during the June months, I will have another presentation on Bicep, which will have more hands-on demonstration than the one that I'm going to show today. And today, my main purpose is to make sure that when we speak about security of your cloud infrastructure, when we are speaking about uh, all these important things why we should secure our infrastructure in cloud, you have all the answers so that you can use them in your day-to-day interaction with your team, or you are planning that with your customers, because nowadays everybody knows that security is paramount. You cannot build your solution, or you cannot deliver anything to your customers without putting a good thought, without making good attempt to show the how you are going to secure and why your solution is going to be secure for the customer. So without any overdue, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to switch here the gears a little bit. This is information about myself, which probably you are aware about. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP and I'm a cloud marathoner. As you may know, I'm running that blog post. I'm trying to post there at least, a couple times a month, and I'm sharing the things that doesn't work or might be interesting for you in while dealing with the Microsoft Azure and as well as the cloud infrastructure. So I strongly recommend you to go and follow me up, or give a follow on the socials, because if you check them, you will see that I usually do share a lot of knowledge in terms of Azure training, and as well as the Microsoft Azure services that are uh, tightly connected with the security, DevSecOps, and as well as the architecture. And so that's kind of small introduction about that. Next, I want to just go to some couple slides here about the company where I'm working, and Tech Solution is a company where I'm employed, and it's a good place to start and do your career. We are doing mission critical solutions, and we are enabling cloud solutions to our customers. And this is the spectrum of different agencies and customers where we are doing the work. And one of the missions that we try to provide is the best cloud solution provider for our customers to choose that and provide it. Next is actually, this is one of the biggest projects that we implemented in the T-Rex solutions as a US Census 2020. And this is the scale and share of this project. And currently, we are also delivering mission critical services to other government agencies. But while we are doing this work, we have a number of talented engineers and cloud architects in our team. And if you are looking for, switching the gears and uh, you would like to, look at the open positions, please go and check the Tyrix Solutions LLC open positions. And if there is something that you see fit to your current skills and these are the things that you would like to learn and do, please contact me. I would be, I would be glad to help you in that journey. Next, without any overdue, I'm going to go through certain things that we are going to cover today, right? So first of all, we will start with the risks. So why manual configurations are so problematic, right? So why we should avoid these manual configurations at any cost that's possible, and what are the risks they are bringing. Then we will look into the second part is how we can how you can declare your resources as infrastructure as a code and what benefits you are getting out of it. And after that, of course, we have to look into DevSecOps principles in terms of what are those important things, what are those important steps that you need to have when you are trying to deliver and build your solution on those dev secure DevSecOps principles. Next, we'll look into policies and governance, which should be a part of any security solution, any actually solution that you claim it to be secure, because there should be guardrails and policies to make sure that it can stay secure and you have processes in place to keep it secure. And lastly, we'll look into some use cases and demos where certain principles of them are going to be implemented using the Microsoft Azure Bicep language, which is the new modern language to declare your Azure resources as a code and then manage them more easily. When you compare that with other with the previous way, like with when you compare that with ARM templates, it's much more code oriented. That's why it's called infrastructure as a code. All right. So I hope that's interesting to all of you. But meanwhile, before kicking off the session, I want to say that if you have any questions, please use the comments. From time to time, I'm going to check it. Thank you, Alan, for joining our session. I'm going to check those comments. And part of this presentation, I want to make sure it's interactive, meaning that you don't have to, just listen. If you listen for something, and because as I mentioned in the previous thing, there would be more of a principles and resources and guidance in terms of how to get yourself from knowing nothing about security of or how to secure infrastructure as a code into a position where at least you have some guidance, you have some understanding, and you know the principles that you need to put in place in order to get to that state of having your infrastructure turn into a code, right? Your cloud infrastructure to get turn all the configurations and resources get turned into the code so that you can apply all the best practices to manage that, right? And prevent those issues that are related to the manual configuration risks. All right. So I hope that sounds good to you. And if you are, again, if you have any questions, please use the chat. I will check it from time to time to address the questions. And please be interactive. All right. So let's kick off from here. And next thing, as it is here, we are going to look into manual configurations. So first thing is that inconsistent configuration is something that's attribute of the manual configurations, and it's come with a very pure and inconsistent configuration. Manual configuration of cloud resources can lead to those errors in configurations which could have been negatively impact the performance of your cloud environment and resources. And the manual updates can result in errors and mistakes. But even if the updates works very well, what always annoys me about the manual updates is that they are almost never consistent, right? That consistency is always missing in those manual configurations, which creates pain down the road. Next, these manual configurations, they bring the security risks, which is when you rely too much on manual configurations, it can also lead to those security risks due to misconfigurations, right? Or a lack of strong security measures that are going to be missing when you are doing things manually and you're trying to catch up with everything. Next, think that when you are rely on manual configurations in your work with the cloud vendor, and doesn't matter, it can be any cloud solution provider, then you are vendor lock-in, which means that you rely on that manual configuration of the cloud resources, and it may lead to vendor lock-in because if you decide to switch those cloud vendors, you will have to manually transfer all of them into another account or into another set of data and configurations, and then try start everything from the beginning. While if you scripting them out and you have this as a code, it's much easier to parameterize that and then reuse that on another set of account or on another set of the deployments that you are planning to acquire, or it will add this agility when you agility in your process, agility in deploying the your cloud infrastructure when you have the when you get rid of the manual configurations as much as possible. Next thing, the issue of having these manual configurations is the cost overruns, right? With cost overruns, it's about manual configuration of cloud resources, uh, resources that can lead to the cost overruns, as it is difficult to accurately estimate the costs involved in creating, configuring, and managing cloud resources. Next, and the final one is having this manual configuration, which would essentially mean that you will have lack of automation in your solution, meaning that you are not going to have this competitive solution that has automation built in. And with manual configuration, you miss out all the benefits of automation, and you wouldn't be able to create that repetitive process or repetitive set of scripts that you can use, such as faster deployment, improved scalability, and flexible resource management is just going to be out of touch to you when you are following the manual configurations. So now we spoke about all these things that are security risks, they are not good. Now let's look into the options that you get, tools and options that you can get with infrastructure as a code. Okay. And before jumping into that, let me check the uh, questions. Hello, Gaurav. So thank you for joining this session. So let's look into options and tools that you get with infrastructure as a code, right? So first of all, what you get is, of course, Azure Bicep, right? It's part of this presentation. And Azure Bicep, as you all know, it's a domain specific language, meaning that it is especially created for provisioning and managing Azure resources in your environment, in your subscriptions. Uh, and as well as the purpose of Azure Bicep is to simplify the authoring, creation experience of those resources with more cleaner syntax and more code reuse. So, as you know, this new language aims to make it easier to write infrastructure as a code for developers and as well as for the DevOps engineers who need to maintain, automate, and as well as monitor the Azure infrastructure. So typically before Azure Bicep language that was there and the scripts was there, what you would have to do as a DevOps engineer is you would have to rely on ARM templates to provision and maintain Azure infrastructure, which was coming with its own pain points in terms of reusability and climbing that, learning curve of understanding every bits of ARM template declaration, which wasn't intuitive at all. So once you have one of the best tools on Azure is Azure Bicep, but there are alternatives, right? So you can also use the Terraform, and Terraform is well-known, established player nowadays. There are tons of resources on that. And what it enables basically, it enables infrastructure automation for provisioning, compliance, and management of not just one cloud vendor, like not just Azure or AWS or GCP, but you can also use that on the as a service for other data centers. So with Terraform, the one of the good parts or benefits is you learn one syntax and one structure that gets applied to support the cloud providers of your choice. However, keep in mind that even though the syntax is going to stay same, you would still have to know the elements of each cloud solution provider service. For example, in Azure, when you are dealing with uh, storage accounts, you need to use the that service provider and know the properties and as well as configurations of storage account in order to configure that to your project needs. And with AWS, when you're speaking about blob storage, we can talk about S3 buckets. There you have to know the differences, the properties and settings of that resource on AWS. So then once we have this too, there's Ansible, right? So that's another one, and you can use Ansible to provision the underlying infrastructure of your environment as well. And you can use them for virtualized hosts and hypervisors. You can do network devices and bare metal servers as well. It can also install services, add compute hosts, and provision resources, services, and application inside your cloud resources, cloud services. Next, a similar thing to that, we have AWS CDK, which is stands for Cloud Development Kit. And what it is, it's basically a framework developed by AWS that allows you to define and provision cloud infrastructure in code and deploy it through AWS cloud formations. And part of this CDK is that it's not just for AWS, but there are CDK. There's also Terraform CDK that you may look into. However, if you are into infrastructure as a code on a AWS environment, that's one of the choices that you wanna be aware about, so that you can use the power of infrastructure as a code. Next, we have Pulumi, right? So Pulumi is a different type of approach where you are actually dealing with the code. And while both Terraform and Pulumi are declarative tools, Pulumi uses a general purpose imperative language when you define your um, cloud resources there. What does it mean imperative language, right? Why Pulumi does it? It means that with what it means is that with Terraform, you automatically generate the infrastructure based on the code that's written, while in Pulumi, it would require you as a user to write a code that specifically describe the infrastructure. So that's kind of differences you get between those two services. So let me check the chat really quick before moving to the next slide. Hi everyone, how are you doing? Okay, thank you everyone who joined. We are doing great here. Thank you, Chris and Hugo, for putting the messages. So next, let's move forward here, and now we are going to look into how we can declare resources, why we should declare resources as infrastructure as a code, right? So what are the benefits that you get when you declare your cloud resources as infrastructure as a code, when you compare that with, let's say, just manually going to the console and clicking on the UI and then provisioning and then configuring that. First of all, of course, it is much more so the question, let me rephrase that, is why does declaring cloud resources as a code minimize the security threats and improve the security compliance posture of your organization? So to get an answer for that, I'm going to look at how you can first of all, declaring those cloud resources as code refers to using programming language or configuration file to define and provision cloud resources such as virtual machines, storage, and networks, right? So those are the main resources that you need in the cloud. And by doing this, organizations can benefit from the following security advantage. So first of all, you get consistency and repeatability. And declaring cloud resources as code enables your organization to maintain a consistent and repeatable infrastructure across multiple environments. And this will reduce the risk of human error and configuration drift, which can lead to the security vulnerability. So you eliminate that risk right away. Next is automation, right? So it's not a secret that infrastructure as a code enables organizations to automate the provisioning, configuration, and management of their cloud resources. That's why all the companies like to reduce the need for manual interventions, which can introduce security risks. So to minimize that, first of all, we have to make sure that there's no manual intervention into the management of your cloud resources. Next is security testing, right? So when you are dealing with infrastructure as a code, it's not just about making sure that all the resources are properly deployed and they are in place, but you also want to test their security uh, f- uh, using the tools like infrastructure as a code tools. You want to have this availability to identify the security misconfigurations on your resources. And that will help you to identify the vulnerabilities in cloud resources before they are even deployed into your environment. This can introduce checks on certain things, like, for example, you can check on passwords, on open network ports, and is there any insecure storage configurations that are part of the deployment. Then another beauty is version control, right? So by using version control tools, organizations, and especially in your project yourself, you can track the changes made to the cloud infrastructure over time. And you can compare those previous changes with the new change, to make sure that all the intended new changes are actually part of your deployment script, and it's a part of your deployment code that's going to be that's going to be deployed and enabled on the desired environment. So having this version control will enable you quickly revert those previous known good state of the infrastructure in the case of any security incident, or in the case of some dramatic failure that you want to avoid in your DevOps practices. Next, we have compliance, right? So with the compliance, we are all talking about declaring cloud resources as code that can help your organizations achieve and maintain compliance with security standards and regulations, such as SOC 2. There's like HIPAA, as you know, in United States for the healthcare related stuff, and you have PCI related compliance standards. So by automating the deployment of security controls and configurations, you and your organization can more easily demonstrate your compliance posture to the auditors and organizations who might be involved in checking the compliance of your services and as well as solutions. So long story. So if you summarize them all together, declaring your cloud resources as code has many benefits for your organization. So first, we mentioned that it is going to improve your security posture of your organization. It will ensure that the infrastructure is configured in a inconsistent way that meets security requirements. It also makes it easier to detect, identify, and remediate security vulnerabilities. Then, by automating the deployment of cloud resources, uh, your organization and yourself, you can reduce those manual errors that we talked about. You can enforce security best practices and ensure that all resources are properly secured based on the guidelines from the project and team that you got. So additionally, using the code to manage cloud resources will allow your organization to track change and detect unauthorized or malicious modifications. Just imagine about this, You know that there's a supply chain issue of the libraries when there was some security vulnerabilities. So if you had this uh, the if you had your packages and everything, and as well as deployment scripts codified, it it shouldn't be taking you too much time to figure out, how you can revert back the previous version of library to make sure that that security incident that's affecting certain libraries of the deployment are not uh, are not in the production, so that you can revert it back to the state where you don't have vulnerability. And finally, uh, this will allow your organization to quickly deploy a secure infrastructure on demand, right? So because you invested your time in automation and in the security testing, and it will reduce the time to market for new application and services in a way that it is more reliable, it's more secure, and it's more compliant. All right, now let's look into DevSecOps principles and how you can uh, get ahead of the, let's say, competition, get ahead of your other team members by understanding and exploring those principles in your solutions. Before diving into that, let me check the chat here. So I don't see any questions so far, but if you have any questions in terms of those presented materials, please, chime in and ask your questions, because I would like to have this a more dynamic kind of uh, collaborative session where you have your questions and I basically address them right on the spot. So DevSecOps principles, right? So some people may say that there is no DevSecOps. It's actually all about DevOps, and security is a part of it. And you are right. When we speak about DevSecOps, it's all about how you can integrate your development operations and as well as security teams in a way that they all help each other. They are part of the big. They are all intertwined, and they are helping to basically, they are helping to uh, they are helping for your delivery of your products and services to happen more faster, more reliable, more secure. So what are those modern DevSecOps principles that you can learn and invest to, right? So first of all, as you know, it's a shift to the left. This philosophy says that by emphasizing the shifting security to the left, you are basically moving your security testing and controls to the earlier stage in your software development lifecycle. This will enable your teams to identify and address security vulnerabilities earlier in the development process, and that would reduce the cost and as well as impact of the remediations, because the timing, if you address them, once you have this capability to address the security vulnerabilities or any drifts, issues in your configurations earlier in the development, it means it's not going to end up in your production environment. You wouldn't have to deal with all the headache that comes with those issues, and this will enable your teams to identify and address those security vulnerabilities earlier in the development process. So what it means shift left is actually has another phrase called fail fast and often, which basically says don't spend a lot of time building a perfect secure solution that you want to deploy at the end of the cycle. What you have to do instead, you have to come to the mentality where you want to deploy as quick as possible by running those unit tests, integration tests, security tests, and so that you can fail fast and you have quick feedback. You can have a quick loop of this feedback so that your developers can work on that issues. Your security engineers can be part of the process and help to move process faster. Of course, because of shift left is all about automation, we have to mention the automation. And automation, we don't have to speak too much about that. We know that it's a core part of delivering, testing, and deploying and managing your code while using the security controls, right? So it should be part of this. Next, of course, with DevSecOps principles, you have your continuous integration and continuous deployment. That's must to have for anything that you deal when in DevSecOps principles. And the beauty of that is that approach of CI/CD approach, it's actually emphasizes a frequent automated testing and deployment of code change. That's what it is all about. And because of that, DevSecOps requires that security testing and controls are integrated into your CI/CD pipeline. You can have different tools that implement CI/CD, right? You can have your Jenkins pipelines, you can have your Azure DevOps as a managed pipeline for uh, for uh, CI/CD process. But the most important thing here is that that tool, no matter which tool you choose, it should enable your team to quickly identify and address security vulnerabilities. Then you are talking about bringing actual value to your customers. Then next thing is security as a code. So what it is basically it's a shift in your understanding and approach where you want to make sure that those security controls you can bake in as a code into your solutions. So it refers to the concept of having this code and code as an automation that defines your security controls. And when we speak about security controls, you can relate that on Azure to the policies and procedures that needs to be in place. And that, of course, will enable your team to manage security in a consistent and repeatable way. That would reduce, again, the risk of human error. Next, of course, we are talking about in any DevOps mindset, you would have to have collaboration and communication, right? You because overall, it's not just the system and technology, but it's all about the mindset and collaboration and the power that people, your engineers, are bringing to enable the solutions. And with that collaboration you are strengthening the security and of your security of your application and your operations teams, developments team, and as well as the security team. They are all integrated into one body where they can act and where they can act in a way that uh, it is harmonious and you don't have any frictions. You have some collaboration, you have discussions, and you have a team who is trying to work together to identify and address the security vulnerabilities while enabling the productivity uh, of every team member. Then, of course, part of it is continuous improvement, right? So once you have the principles, once you have the lines and process that you want to follow, next step is always reflecting back on that at the end of the deployment or a sprint. If you are using agile approach, then you want to reflect back on the learnings. You want to reflect back and continuously improve your approach, how you secure your pipeline, how you secure your application resources, and how you deploy and manage the resources on your cloud environment. So that brings us to the point where every team that's involved into this process should consistently assess and improve the security practices, process, and tools to ensure that they are keeping up with the latest threats and best practices that are part of these DevSecOps principles. Okay, that said, next I'm going to speak about policies and governance principles that you want to keep in mind while doing this. So, is there any questions so far? I'm checking the comment section. So far, there's no questions. So, I will fast forward a little bit to make sure that we have enough time for to show the demo. But with policies and governance, we are talking about security compliance, right? And what are the policies and governance that drive organizations toward the adoption of secure infrastructure as a code approach? So first of all, we are talking about security compliance, right? So that's something that we mention about that HIPAA, PCI, and other compliance standards that based on the industry and the customer that you are serving, you want to make sure that you are using the secure infrastructure as a code approach that can help your customer to achieve security compliance by enabling them to enforce those security policies and best practices in a standardized and automated way. Then we already mentioned that DevOps practice should be part of these policies and governance. And DevOps will uh, make sure that secure infrastructure as a code approach will help your team, your DevOps team, DevSecOps approach to build and deploy secure infrastructure in a consistent and automated manner. So next we have actually risk management, right? So you, while you are trying to define your policy and governance, your risk management needs to be defined on organizational level that would identify and mitigate risks to their infrastructure and data. So you can get this more greater visibility and control over the infrastructure, making it easier to identify and address security vulnerabilities. Then, of course, part of it is continuous monitoring. With continuous monitoring, it's critical. It's a very critical aspect of maintaining security of an organization's infrastructure, and you can get your with those infrastructure as a code approach. Security can be built into the infrastructure from the start, and it can, continuously get monitored for security vulnerabilities. And with this approach, your organization and your project will get the ability to automate security testing and validation by ensuring that security measures are maintained and tested over time. And finally, compliance auditing, right? So we spoke about the auditing, but compliance auditing is a requirement for many organizations in our industry, right? Because with infrastructure as a code approach, audit trails can be automatically generated and maintained, making it easier to demonstrate compliance with security policies and regulations. So, in summary, the policies and governance that drive organizations toward adopting a secure infrastructure as a code approach are security compliance, they are DevOps practices, they are all about managing the risk and continuously monitoring your environment while having compliance auditing process more streamlined and easier to maintain. So that said, let's look at how you can organize your cloud resources and what are the caveats there that you need to be aware about. So no matter how small or big is your project, taking time to think through the approach of how you are going to organize your digital assets is very important first step, right? And while you are doing this, here on the graphic on the right side, you have a Microsoft Azure environment and resources you would need to consider for a couple of points while trying to make this decision, right? Namely, you would need to consider the following factors like resource governance, how you're going to manage that. You want to consider management scope of the different resources and services that you are planning to deploy and maintain. Next, you want to consider infrastructure as a code management options are what are going to be your approach in managing your cloud resources and security services as a code. And while you have them, so how you can, maintain those things, how you can reuse and provide more enterprise ready approach in terms of uh, applying and sharing the code across. Then you come with you need to think about modules, right? How you can modularize your system, and as well as how you can use maybe you are going to use template specs in Azure, or you want to use Azure Container Registry to have your code version control and as well as shared across the team in a way that it's a private for your organization and it is not publicly available. So from that perspective, before jumping into some use cases and demos, I want to check the audience here for a sec to see, is there any questions or anything. Let me look at the text. Not too bad. Okay. Continue. Okay, you are welcome. So I have to make a break. So let's look into those use cases and demos that you may find very helpful in your day-to-day interactions, right? So let's look at, before jumping into that, I want to share that there are different use cases and demos where you can apply, but one of them is tag governance, where you can get some easy wins, right? Because overall, speaking about security and compliance, you don't want to boil the ocean at one attempt. You want to make sure that you start with some easy wins in terms of how you can get your environment in a way that you know what's going on in your digital infrastructure. And one of the ways is to have this tag governance policy, right? With deploying this Azure tag governance and in a way that is a compliant, you can get the a number of benefits. In addition to tracking the resources, you can also use them in your billing purposes. As you know, in Azure billing, you can rely on tags in order to get calculation on certain resources and the cost over the time of the use. So in terms of tag governance, I'm going to share the code now and switch to the Visual Studio Code. So what you see is here is actually, it's a GitHub repo that I'm going to use. So let me show you the, it's a GitHub repo that you can get the code and everything. And I'm usually sharing that with everyone. If you have been on my previous sessions, you know what I'm talking about. So here under the Learn Bicep, you can access this code. Okay, so everything that I showed today are going to appear here. And you can dive into tagging policies. That's tagging policies that have been deployed, and I'm going to demo them to you. As you know, deploying policies, Azure policies and governance, it takes some time, so I made that ahead of time. In addition to this, I want to drive your focus back to the Visual Studio Code. So I'm back in the Visual Studio Code, and here, before diving into complex tagging policies, I want to mention that there are certain situations where you want to have uh, situational condition where you want to apply certain security services for certain stage. For example, if you are dealing with your production and staging environment where you want to protect your storage account from being deleted accidentally, because there's a data that you don't want to get basically deleted, there are ways how you can manage that. One way is, of course, when you provision the Azure portal, you can put the manual configurations and logs, but the better way is to make sure that it's part of your deployment. So for example, in this example, under the samples folder, let me make sure it's actually, I can zoom in here so it's better visibility. So let me know if you don't see it well or it's too small. So here I'm going to show you one example where we are using this number three deploy storage with log. Here we are deploying our storage account in a way that in this code we define the scope where we want to make our deployment. It's a subscription level. Then we define the resource group here, and once this defined, then we actually create the resource group, right? That's what it's happening here. And then next step in this Azure Bicep code, we see that we have a description where a storage module with a parameter is defined. So we go and deploy this module of storage with parameter. And part of the parameter, it asks us, do we wanna, which Azure region we wanna deploy? and as well as do we require geo redundancy. So based on these parameters, if you dive into this storage dot storage slash param bicep, you will see that it's actually declares different environments here at the top, and then once the storage account and its name is defined, it's going to take your geo redundancy flag, which is, are you going to, if you are going to use it for production or higher environments like can be staging as well, you want to make sure that it has some type of redundancy. But if it is for development and sandbox purposes, then of course it doesn't make too much sense to have your redundancy built into there. So once we have our storage account with the redundancy parameter flag deployed here at the line between line numbers 24 and 30, next thing that happens is that we are actually building a resource log, right? So we want to make sure that there's uh, that storage cannot be deleted, okay? And that's why we deploy this resource log and we attach that to the storage account. In this way, we gain some early wins in terms of our uh, configuring our parameterization here, right? And as well as locking it using the lock resource on Azure Bicep. Next, you can go and deploy this, but then I want to go and show you this another deployment of tagging policies into the subscription level. And this is where after deploying this code, what you should see is, let me show that on the screen. So if I scroll back to my Azure subscription here under the subscriptions, if you go to the governance, let me go to the policies here. And then for the given subscription, this is the basically overview of the policies that we have. And part of it is tag governance initiative that's deployed here. As you know, in Azure policies and definitions, you have initiatives that are have a number of assignments and definitions under it. So if you look into tag governance, you will see that the number of policies that it's actually implementing are listed here. And there are a number of non-compliant resources, right, that we have here. So this is based all on applying certain conditions on tagging policies. And in terms of looking into each of these tagging policies and understanding their purpose, because of lack of time, I'm not going to dive into each of them, but the code is there for you, defined on the number 19 here, where we define this uh, tag governance name, policy set name. Then we actually have to deploy each of these policy definitions separately that you see here that's happening between the line number 9 and 27. And finally, we deployed the policy initiative using this bicep representation that you see here. We supported team tags and other tags that your organization or your project based on the compliance needs to have in place. And then, of course, you create those tags and you create your policy definitions and let it to be deployed. So one caveat about this deployment is it may take up to 30 minutes to get everything deployed and applied. But usually on after the first run, you would see that after deployment succeeded, you should be able to see on your Azure portal. Let me switch back to Azure portal. You should be able to see your tag governance. So in my case, I put the -1.00. It's a good idea to version control your your initiatives, your policy initiatives, because over time you would have to adjust them based on the feedback that you may receive from your security engineers and as well as other team members to meet the compliance and organizational standards. So to give you another more simple example here, that you can always go and add a new Azure policy. For example, here for allowed, I have a policy that says that allow only North American locations to be used in this deployment. And here, as you see, there's one resource here, which is located in Brazil's house that's actually, breaking this compliance. So that's the only resource, uh, that has been there before the tags have been applied. And as you know, with Azure policies, you can always audit or you can deny the action from happening, so that if you apply this policy and it has a deny action to prevent Azure resources to be deployed into the Azure regions which are not part of the which are not allowed by your organization, or compliance doesn't allow that, then you can use these Azure policies. And you can always go view the definition just to give you some idea. And you will see that here under the definitions you have assignments and as well as parameters that are defined where you can assign them. So let me go back here. And if you want, you can always, again, view the definition. You can edit the assignment. In your case, let's say if you want to add South Brazil to this, you can always go to parameters. You can update the parameters here and make it happen. So if you wonder what these in the brackets, we have a stage here, so what it stands for. So these Azure regions, the ones that don't have a bracket with the stage, they stand for physical locations. But we also have a logical locations, Azure regions, where we have this stage for the internal use within the Microsoft Azure infrastructure. So you want to make sure you actually choose the ones which are not staging ones, because that's they are not the ones that you are actually want to rely when you are building your Azure policies. Okay, they are logical. They are not physical Azure regions. Okay, that said, I'm going to switch back here to the demo and see, if you have any questions before concluding our session here. Okay, let's see. There's a questions from Joe. Thank you, Joe, for asking this question. First of all, do we need a bicep template per resource group, or can we apply based on a regex of the resource group or a list of resource groups? So in terms of bicep template, it depends which scope you wanna apply it. Okay, so you can have a resource group scope, you can have a subscription scope, and you can have a, management group scope. So these are the three scopes. And based on your implementation, let's say if you are trying have all your resources that you need scoped into the resource group, it makes sense to deploy them on a resource group level, and then you don't have to use the regex. Okay, that's part of it. But if you have some naming conventions that you want to apply in the tagging, and in the defining the tag names, or when you are trying to define the resource names that needs to follow certain standards, then yes, in your Azure policies you can define that what is the expected resource name, which is compliant with your regex rule that you put to audit or to check. So what I will just add here, Joe, is when you are trying to experiment with those rules, always start with the audit, because when you put the deny action or so, then your users can be badly affected with that. So that you want to start with audit, see what resources are going to be affected and what is going to be the outcome before applying that and enforcing that on the environment where you want to apply your um, Azure policies. Okay. That said, I checked the questions, and any comments here on the chat. So please let me know if you have any questions. Meanwhile, I will just go over what we have covered in this demo. So we went through that risks of manual configuration. We talked about declaring resource as an infrastructure as a code, what tools are available, what you can use regardless of the cloud environment that you want to work on. Then we looked into DevSecOps principles. What are the main principles you want to build into your solution and into the approach how you secure your solutions for the customers. Then we looked into policies and governance, what you get out of it, what are the guardrails, and then we looked into specific examples that you have on Microsoft Azure environment and how you can use them. And finally, we looked into a warm up, we looked into the demo and as well as use cases where you can define your tag policies and how you can deploy them using this sample code uh, that's actually located on a GitHub repo, which is I'm going to share on the references, so you can take a look at that if you want to get any ideas. So here's a QCR code. So if you are watching on your mobile phone or even you are watching on your screen, you can just you can go ahead and scan this QCR code. It will take you into the mostly GitHub repositories where you can get more important, you can get good resources for how to start learning the Azure Bicep and as well as about Azure policies and how you can get up to speed with Azure Bicep using and watching the first look course on LinkedIn platform. So please take a shot of it. You can always take the screenshot and then go ahead and look into those links. And I want to say thank you everyone who joined today's session. We had some questions here. Yes, thin and scope is a management scope. Yes, thin and scope. So all the demos are, there's a questions, where are all the demos located? Let me put that in the chat, okay, the repo name. That would be actually useful for everyone. So repo name is Learn Bicep. And I will switch back here and put that into the chat. Comment, oops. So I put the repo name in the chat, Alan. So let me know, if you have any questions. And thank you for, asking and being part of this Cloud Lunch and Learn session today. So thank you everyone again for organizing. Thank you being part of these solutions. If you want a more practical Azure Bicep specific and not the policy or security specific sessions, please check my prior Cloud Launch and Learn session where I speak about Azure Bicep and I'm more focused into the fundamentals of that, how you can get started and use it. But overall, I would say that if you are new for Azure Bicep, one of the good resources you can check is Azure Bicep First Look video. There's some more Azure Bicep videos are going to come very soon, so stay tuned for that. I know that once you start using the infrastructure as a code, you really find a lot of benefits and you just want to learn more and switch your management of resources, cloud resources, in a way that it's the infrastructure as a code rather than manual configurations and manual maintenance, which is really hard and it's a prone for errors and human mistakes. So again, thank you everyone for joining this session. Really appreciate your time, guys, here. And let me know if you have any questions. And in our next episode, which is going to be next week, you will have another Cloud Launch and Learn session. But in a month, I'll have another presentation where we will focus more on a code-based sharing approach that you can have with Azure Bicep. Because one way is that you can start learning and implementing infrastructure as a code as a bicep for your pet projects, right? But another thing is that when you want to implement that for production, you are trying to implement that for the teams and organizations where you want to share certain standards in your bicep code and you want to share those modules which has organizational standards and coding standards baked into the modules that you can reuse across the organizations. Okay, and sometimes if you want to have a special source in your Azure Bicep code, you can preserve them by using the private ACR, private Azure modules, which I'm going to talk more about that in a month in our session during the June month. Again, thank you everyone for joining this session. Enjoy the rest of the day, and bye for now.